Our Old Testament lesson today comes from Isaiah chapter 60. Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord has risen upon you. For darkness shall cover the earth, and thick darkness the peoples. But the Lord will arise upon you, and his glory will appear over you. Nations shall come to your light, and kings to the brightness of your dawn. Lift up your eyes and look around. They all gather together. They come to you. Your sons shall come from far away, and your daughters shall be carried on their nurses' arms. Then you shall see and be radiant. Your heart shall thrill and rejoice, because the abundance of the sea shall be brought to you. The wealth of the nations shall come to you. A multitude of camels shall cover you, the young camels of Midian and Ephah. All those from Sheba shall come. They shall bring gold and frankincense and shall proclaim the praise of the Lord. Please rise in body or spirit for the reading of the gospel. Our gospel text comes from Matthew chapter 2. In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, asking, "Where is the child who has been born King of the Jews? For we observed his star at its rising, and we have come to pay him homage." When King Herod heard this, he was frightened, and all Jerusalem with him. And calling together all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. They told him, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for so it has been written by the prophet. And you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For from you shall come a ruler who is to be shepherd my people Israel." Then Herod secretly called for the wise men and learned from them the exact time when the star had appeared. Then he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, "Go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word so that I may also go and pay him homage." When they had heard the king, they set out, and there ahead of them went the star that they had seen at its rising, until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw that the star had stopped, they were overwhelmed with joy. On entering the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they knelt down and paid him homage. Then, opening their treasure chests, they offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they left for their own country by another road. The word of the Lord. You may be seated.
Good morning. Well, it felt like a bit of a journey writing this sermon this week. I don't know if it feels similar to anyone else or you can relate, but I feel like Christmas kind of pulls this trick on us. Like it always seems better in hindsight through the lens of nostalgia, where somehow the stress and the frenzy can seem to melt away, and they leave us with memories of sparkling decorations, with lights on Christmas trees, stockings hung on mantles. They leave us with memories where everything seems to go right and to be beautiful. And I think it can and it's as though we can sort of create this perfect memory by which we can hold all future Christmases to. That if by creating the perfect memory, maybe the stresses and the frenzy of future Christmases might be less. But I think we lose something when we disconnect events from our lives from the actual lived experience of them. And I think that sometimes we do that with the story of the Magi. We paint sort of this gloss over the story. We often present it as a story fit for children rather than adults. And it kind of feels like a choice that the lectionary reading ends with the Magi's departure in verse 12 and not the absolute horror that takes place just a few verses later, where Jesus' family has to flee to Egypt in order to escape the wrath of King Herod. And so my point here is not to be a downer Debbie or not to cheapen the wonder and the beauty of Jesus' birth. but I wonder if anyone else can relate to coming to Epiphany and feeling a little ragged. That the stress of this overpacked season, calendars, travel, family, it all takes a bit of a toll. And I think we hit the new year and we feel more ready to take down the decorations and the wreath, put everything in a box and forget about it. But yet, here stands Epiphany, interrupting our plans to pack away Christmas and look forward to this new year. And when I'm tired, part of me thinks that 12 days of Christmas feels a bit excessive. Like, do we really have to stand here again 2 full weeks after Christmas and look at this story one more time? Epiphany seems like this strange final trailhead on the Christmas journey. And it's a path that will lead us back into the wilderness, a path that will lead us towards Lent, towards darkness. But our path sort of echoes the journey the Magi took, as though we follow a path first etched by their own footprints. These men who traveled far towards the light of Jesus and then away from it. And I think that Epiphany is an invitation of sorts, an invitation to pause a final time at the wonder of the Christmas story, the miracle of the birth of Jesus, to look and not shy away from the reality of it, the tensions of the story, the pain and the sorrow that will come immediately after the Magi's departure. It is an opportunity to look at the light one more time and to consider what we might take away from it. And so as I look at the gospel story, like with many stories out of it, the details often seem lacking. For centuries, Christians and scholars have tried to flesh out who exactly the Magi were, where they came from, what exactly their role in the ancient world was. Others have tried to explain what they saw in the sky that night, what astrological wonder or cosmic event took place that caused them to leave their homes and to follow an unknown path. And so over the years, we've given them names that have moved away from Magi. We've called them wise men, we've called them kings. We've reduced their number to 3. I guess we thought since they brought 3 gifts, there must have been 3 of them. And so the early church actually gave them names: Melchior, Gaspar, and Balthasar. And you'll see in art throughout the centuries that they've depicted them as arriving from different parts of the ancient world to pay homage to the child King Jesus. The gospel writer, however, does not include any of these details. What we know of them simply is that they were Magi and that they were compelled to follow a rising star. The word Magi is of Persian origin, and it's thought to have described a priestly caste, likely men of religion and science who understood how to read the stars. And they also must have had some level of knowledge or exposure to the Hebrew scriptures because they were able to connect this cosmological event to the birth of a Jewish king. And so something, maybe the Holy Spirit, maybe just curiosity, they left everything to embark on a journey towards Judea, towards a light that whispered, "Come, I will be worthy of this journey." And I wonder what that journey looked like. There's also a lot of missing details there. I think we kind of just imagine it like they left and then they arrived. But I imagine that there was a lot of stress organizing a trip like the one they embarked on. If they were coming from Persia, their journey was likely over 900 miles. And out of curiosity, I Googled how many miles a camel can go in one day, about 20 to 25. So they were looking at a trip that was likely over a month long. And so they had to organize provisions. They had to organize gifts fit for a king. And I sort of wonder what their other peers might have thought of this journey. Did they see them as going on a fool's errand, following a star? Or were they commissioned by the other priests to go and pay homage on all of their behalfs? I don't know. But I like to imagine the scene unfolding kind of like a movie. We get to the part where they go out on their journey, the montage begins. There's a swell of music that makes all of us feel braver, like we too would follow a star. And in that montage, we would see them going out into the wilderness. We might get the scope, the passage of time, night after night and day after day, following this star. Did they sit around their campfire each night and wonder, was it worth it? Do we keep going? Was the star always in the distance, feeling just out of reach? Did their backs hurt from the days spent on a camel and the nights spent sleeping on the ground? I wonder if they ever shared their campfire with other travelers. Did they direct their attention to that star in the night sky? Did others wonder, just as the Magi, what might be on the other side? Eventually, the montage would end, and the Magi arrive at the city of Jerusalem, the city of David, a city where anyone might find a king of Jerusalem. Instead, they find Herod, who has the title king, but it's kind of, he just said some political maneuvering for that title. It's not like he was king in birthright. And Herod casts this ominous shadow over the story of the whole. This is where we see the tension begin of two very different kings. And so Herod hears the report of the Magi searching for the one who is born king of the Jews. And he responds with fear, a fear that the gospel writer says is shared by all of Jerusalem, which gave me pause. All of Jerusalem? Like the entire Jerusalem, every person was worried about this Messiah, this king. Perhaps the gospel writer is referring to those like Herod, people of power and influence and wealth, people who stood something to lose if a new political leader emerged and challenged the status quo. But Herod was known for his suspicion, for his fear, for his violence, and I wonder if there were people who worried not out of a change of status quo, but a fear of the violence that might follow, as political changes often come with violence. Regardless, Herod calls the priests, the experts of the law, to inquire where the Messiah, the anointed one, would be born. And the language begins to change around who exactly the Magi are looking for. The Magi come looking for a king. Herod asks the teachers of the law about a Messiah. And so the experts point Herod to the small town of Bethlehem, 6 miles away. And the gospel writer quotes a prophecy from Micah 5:2, and he inserts the word shepherd, another change in what we might expect this king the Magi are looking for. And so I wonder if these hints are the gospel writer's way of telling us that this king the Magi are searching for is a king of a different kind. But before the Magi can complete their journey, they unknowingly become complicit in Herod's plot to harm the child. As Herod sends them out to Bethlehem, he instructs them to report back so that he could also worship the child. And so we see two very different types of rulers. One whose rule was characterized by suspicion, by fear, and ultimately by violence. And then in this story, we begin to see the glimpse of a different kind of ruler. One who's characterized as being a shepherd, an anointed one, a Messiah. One who is not born in the city of kings, but outside of the city of kings, in a town of little consequence just beyond it. It feels like an especially gentler depiction, especially when compared to Herod. And so the Magi depart again, and the star seems to appear again, and it takes them to a humble dwelling place. Unlike Luke's nativity scene, there are no heavenly hosts singing peace on earth. The star leads them away from power, from what might appear as glory, and it rests upon the home of those who live in the margins, resting over the humble dwelling place of Jesus and Joseph and Mary. And yet, when the Magi arrive at this humble dwelling place, their first reaction is to rejoice to where the star has brought them. And as they enter, they find Mary and Jesus, a poor family. They bear none of the marks of royalty or what we might expect as royalty. None of this seems to fit the worldly definition of a future king. But the Magi seem undeterred. They're undeterred by the ordinariness of this scene, and perhaps they grasp what the gospel writer hints at, that this child will be a different kind of leader. And so they kneel down before Jesus, they worship, they give him gifts. The star and the child, it seems to be enough for the Magi to respond with wonder. A wonder set against the backdrop of poverty and political tension, against the backdrop of a future tragedy. But in the moment, right there, in this hovel that they find, they worship the child that they find there. And the story again leaves us with more questions that we can't be sure of the answer of. We don't know how much of Jesus' identity the wise men understood. We don't know about their stories after they left Bethlehem. We don't know if they heard about the slaughter of children in Bethlehem after their departure. We don't know if they carried any guilt for the sorrow their arrival put into action. And I wish that I could have heard the story the Magi's returned home with. I wish I could hear it from them, see the blanks filled in. But sometimes the best of scholarship can only lead us to maybes and perhapses, to hypotheses that we can't be sure of. And I think this is where the imagination of poets can help us. In my research, my sister introduced me to the Christmas poems of a Russian poet named Joseph Brodsky. His own story begins in the cradle of war. He survives starvation, and his story includes his own flight from an oppressive government. And though his relationship with Christianity was somewhat ambiguous, he began writing annual Christmas poems. He said that he was compelled by a piece of art he clipped out of a Polish magazine depicting the adoration of the Magi. And something about that image compelled him to keep writing, to keep grasping at the light of the Epiphany. In his nativity poem, he writes, "Imagine striking a match that night in the cave. Imagine the crockery, try to make use of its glaze. To feel the cold cracks in the floor, the blankness of hunger. Imagine the desert, but the desert is everywhere. Imagine striking a match in that midnight cave, the fire, the farm beasts in outline, the farm tools and stuff. And imagine, as you towel your face in the enveloping folds, Mary, Joseph, and the infant in swaddling clothes. Imagine the kings, the caravan stilted, as they make for the cave, or rather 3 beams closing in. And in on a star, the creaking of loads, the clink of a cowbell, no thronging of heaven as yet, no peal of the bell that will ring in the end for the infant once he has earned it. Imagine the Lord, for the first time, from darkness and stranded, immensely in distance, recognizing himself in the Son of Man, his homelessness plain to him now in a homeless one." Brodsky strikes a match on the wall of the cave of the Epiphany and somehow captures the reality, both the wonder and the strange ordinariness of it all. He strikes a match against a story, and in its light, There is no heavenly soundtrack. There are no angels. It is a light that illuminates farm equipment and animals, a light that illuminates the separation between God the Father and the Son, a light that recognizes the vulnerability of the incarnation of Christ, now a fragile and soon-to-be homeless child. It is a story of God becoming known, the holy, the sacred, the hidden, becoming visible to mankind. Jesus would later choose to stay in the margins as an itinerant teacher. He said of himself that he had nowhere to rest his head. His ministry would ripple out, and while it would cause political and religious upheaval, it would ripple out to people on the margins, people without power or wealth or influence. And among them, he fed the thousands, he healed the sick, he preached good news to the poor. He shared a prophetic imagination of a heavenly kingdom meeting earth, where God's love breaks through and continues by loving one's neighbor. The wonder of the incarnation is that of human vulnerability. That change could come not from the center of privilege, but from the simple act of love. And maybe in the flickering light of that cave wall, the Magi recognized something of that future. Perhaps they understood the new beginning taking shape in this child named Jesus. And perhaps that's the story they would return telling. I think that part of the wonder of this story lies in the journey that lays ahead of us. That as the biblical story turns away from the nativity, it asks the question, how will we carry what we have seen? How will we join the Magi in the journey back that will certainly take us towards new challenges, new joys, but likely seasons of hardship and heartbreak, seasons of pain and suffering? I think in those moments we can light a match to remember what the Magi saw and what we've seen through their story, the miracle of God who came to bring light and hope, and did so by being born into the margins. And this is easier said than done. Christmas ends, the Epiphany passes, the decorations get taken down, the presents forgotten, and whatever light or wonder can often get lost through that lens of nostalgia that sometimes feels false or fake or incomplete. Can we hold the light as we return to the tension and the stress and the ordinariness of our lives? And as we take a moment to consider that journey that lies ahead of us, how we might hold the light of Jesus in the midst of it, perhaps the words of another poem can be a guide to us. Black theologian and mystic Howard Thurman inspired a generation of civil rights leaders, and his words continue to inspire us today. Of Christmas, he writes this: "When the song of the angels is stilled, when the star in the sky is gone, when the king and princes are home, when the shepherds are back with their flocks, the work of Christmas begins. To find the lost, to heal the broken, to feed the hungry, to release the prisoners, to rebuild the nations, to bring peace among the people, to make music in the heart." Thurman writes of a Christmas that continues past the stars and the angels and the Magi, that the work of Christmas is not something to be boxed up and only brought out a couple of weeks out of the year. Instead, it is a Christmas that is firmly planted in the brokenness of our world. He writes of Christmas like an anthem to sing and to keep singing, that we might respond to this light, that we might respond to this wonder with an epiphany or an aha moment of our own. One where we might find the lost, heal the broken, feed the hungry, release the prisoners, rebuild the nations, bring hope among the people, and make music still in our hearts. And perhaps that seems like it's asking too much of us. But I think that to see the wonder of Jesus is to carry the light. I think it is to see Jesus' vulnerability reflected in all of humanity, in ourselves, in our communities, in those who live on the margins, and in the eyes of all who suffer. It is the choice to keep seeing that vulnerability. It is here that we find that our lives are woven together by this very vulnerability. And I think that the light of the Epiphany, the light that the Magi saw, it shines a light not just on our fragileness, but it also shows us that there is hope. It shows us that there is another lens to see by, the lens of Jesus, the lens of love. I don't know what the path ahead of each of us holds for ourselves, for our community, for our world. Perhaps the thought of a path that leads back into the wilderness or back into the unknown is unsettling. But as we go, might we remember the Magi in our journey. And when the way feels dark or lonely, when the way feels unsettling or steep or uncertain, might we light a match one more time and remember the wonder of Jesus, the miracle of a God who chose to be with us. Thank you.